last video, we alluded to the idea that both the left and the right are deluded about their psychological position within current society. Right-wing people think they're being faithful to the laws of nature, which either no longer exist or have been obscured or supplanted, depending on your interpretation, temporarily or eternally. And then you have the left, which thinks that they're these rebels, but really they're following political correctness. They're following the new law of civilization, which is tolerance, and which is atomization, which is indifference to the organic, indifference to the natural, the worship and obsession with the avatar, the artificial, the created, the new, Faustian expansion, etc. So there's a new set of rules that leftists are loyal to, and they're authoritarian, which is why we see psychologically women, even though we conceive of women as being the chaotic element in the gender spectrum. Women psychologically are more authoritarian. So there are a bunch of delusions we have about gender, about politics, about metaphysics, about the nature of the world and society that we live in. On both sides. Both sides think they're the opposite of what they actually are, which is a paradox that we just see throughout culture. This is not new. This is something that goes back to ancient myth, the concept of a paradox, the concept that Athena represents wisdom, that a woman represents philosophy and the collection of knowledge. Women are very underrepresented, or that on the other hand, the sun, which is this generative energy, this complete chaotic energy without any kind of delineation within itself. It's a completely undifferentiated mass of hydrogen, and yet we conceive of that as a masculine force. So this is not a new phenomenon, but it's interesting to note, it's interesting to analyze. And what I want to do is today break that dichotomy of left versus right, or of, say, that dichotomy of male versus female. I want to look at a Trinitarian analysis of class. So for the warrior starts off as a person who is adhering to the laws of war. And the laws of war, you need to be smart, you need to be strong. There's all kinds of characteristics of virtue that make a good warrior. Jack Donovan, funny enough, people might like him, they might not like him. But one of the interesting things about him is he's honest in his appraisal of masculinity. He says masculinity is an old virtue that was born out of Darwinian evolution, that ultimately the environment that men found themselves in, masculinity was a necessary virtue for those times, for those situations. Now that we live in civilization, it's a different situation. And so the warrior virtues no longer have a Darwinian impulse behind them. Being the ultimate warrior is not going to grant you, the most reproductive success. You could have much more reproductive success by making a lot of money, being a pencil pusher, by, putting forth liberal ideas, promoting liberal ideas. Be a CEO. You can have a lot more children theoretically with sperm donors you could ever have just being an alpha male. Which is, again, why I don't like the alpha-beta dichotomy. Because when you look at a Trinitarian class structure, it just falls apart entirely. Really, the only way to amend the alpha-beta dichotomy is if you say, well, yes, there's an alpha male, clearly. And then within each scheme, there's an alpha and beta. So there's an alpha warrior and a beta warrior. There's a strong warrior, a weak warrior, a good warrior, bad warrior. But then there's a priestly class. And there's an alpha priest and a beta priest. We know there's the Pope, and then there's the priest class underneath the Pope. Okay, well, then we have merchants. We have people who are billionaires and people who are millionaires. So within each of these classes, we can say there's an alpha-beta structure. We can say that there are leaders and followers. I'm not saying that there aren't leaders and followers, but oftentimes we associate the term alpha purely with the virtues of the warrior class. And so then to break everything down into alpha and beta, then you end up saying, well, the alpha male is, the gangster living in the ghetto because he's physically strong, he engages in violence, he conquers women, so on and so forth. That's the alpha male. And Steve Jobs is this little weak, skinny nerd, therefore he's a beta male. That's a right-wing conception of the world which is very diluted and has no nuance and is really an inversion of the current social hierarchy. And a lot of it comes from a resentment of people who are successful. So rather than change themselves, which is very difficult, it's very difficult to change your psychological type. Rather than change your internal mechanisms, you change your perception of the world. You relabel the world to say that Steve Jobs is a loser and I'm a winner because I'm on the right side of history because I'm a right winger. So this is the process that people engage in. But really, we see an evolution from warrior virtue to priestly virtue, because with the introduction not just of tool making is an important part. The introduction of language is an important part. The origin of language. It's difficult in the archaeological record because oral language comes much prior to written language. So it's very difficult to say when did oral language actually appear. Now we could try to look at the structure of the brain, but again, that's something that's very hard. It's very hard for us to map genotypes onto phenotypes in terms of the structure of the brain. So that's something we have a huge difficulty with, and therefore, because of that difficulty, there's a lot of mystery surrounding the introduction of language. And I posed a question to people. I said, a couple of videos back, I said, which came first, the word or the image? A lot of people said, well, historically, the image came first. We started seeing things before we started speaking words. Oral language is a recent invention for humans, where our visual life is so much more primordial than the word. But I would say that DNA is a kind of a language. This is something that I've made at this point in a number of videos. People seem to have completely ignored it, that DNA is a form of language. If DNA is a form of language, then DNA precedes all life on Earth. Well, if we say RNA is also a form of language, it's a form of instruction, abstract obstruction of schizophrenic correspondence or synesthesic correspondence between a symbol, DNA, RNA, ribonucleic acids. You're taking ribonucleic acids and you're creating an instruction, much like a computer program. You're creating a list of instructions for a phenotype where there is no inherent correlation, but there is ultimately an expressed correlation. So that's what I mean by language. I mean it in the broadest sense, not in terms of the spoken word that human mouths are moving, but I mean it in a metaphysical sense, which came first, the image of the word. So that's a much harder question to answer once you see DNA, RNA in this light. And so the emergence of a priest class is not, to me, is not the emergence of a new type in the history of the universe. It's merely the emergence or the expression of the linguistic type within humanity particularly. So we've taken consciousness, which was previously purely imaginary, purely about images, and you could say hyper-autistic because it's focused on image, the immediacy of the image, the animalistic image, rather than the symbol and the word, which as the generative anthropologists say, all language is deferment. All language is deferment. All language is stopping and thinking and speaking. All language is a chasm. All language is stopping. All language is a delineation. You're delineating chronologically. You're no longer in the moment. Language means you're referring to an authority which existed in the past, which constructed the hierarchy of meaning within that linguistic system. So there's an important metaphysical element that's introduced with language that introduces chronology. So when they say in the beginning was the word, it really makes sense in the Gospels because we can't have a concept of beginning, middle, end if we don't have language with which to delineate chronology. If you're simply viewing images and reacting to images like an animal, then you don't have the capacity for language. You also don't have the capacity to understand time. So in that sense, animals are timeless because they don't refer to things in the past or things in the future. They simply see things as they are and they react instantaneously. They can learn, they can create new associations with images, but ultimately it is reactive. And on a deep level, DNA, RNA, of course, linguistic. So there are multiple layers to this thing. There's no, you can't say, well, the animal is purely imaginary. I'm using that term to refer to a quality referring to images. Or I've got to come up with a new term, maybe. Imagery might be a distinct term we could use. So an animal is not purely imagery because it also has a linguistic component in the DNA RNA. So just in the same way as we can't say something is completely of peras or aperion, and I know I pronounced that very badly in the last video. Aperion, whatever. In any case, you can't say one is completely of one or the other, but it's a layering, and the layering expresses itself through evolution of animals, through human evolution. And this is the emergence of the priest class, the emergence of oral language. And the priest class is able to harness oral language. The priest class are those individuals, that top 1%, that shamanic class, that can actually understand and look at language in an intuitive way. You know, language is not intuitive to people. You have to be taught language. But some people just have this silver tongue. Some people just have a gift for gab. They're really good at speaking and writing and poetry and singing. I think singing actually really came before language, and this is indicated by the fact it's much easier to remember something if you put a tune to it. Now that doesn't make any sense because, well, intuitively you're adding information about tones and rhythm and beat and whatever. When you put words to music, you're actually adding information. And so if the brain is a simple quantitative computer, technically a song has more bits and bytes in it than a simple string of text. So clearly our brains are meant to sing as we speak and not meant to just speak in a monotonous voice like an auto text reader. And this is partially why we like listening to people who have enunciation in their voice, and they go deep and they go high, and this is more entertaining to listen to than someone who's naturally monotonous. And we all have to be conscious in this if we want to get our message across. So there's an emergence of a priestly type, and the priestly type is able to harness the energies of society and culture and create cultural artifacts, which are not material artifacts, but they're immaterial cultural artifacts that are transmitted mimetically, not genetically, but mimetically through oral culture. And these artifacts then create the bounds of mating and reproduction selection, which then influences the genetic development of the group. So if you put out a cultural meme, let's say the priest class creates a meme that blonde hair is really cool, then all of a sudden people with blonde hair have a genetic advantage. So the priest class is actually controlling the genetic future of that group. And so the priest class has an enormous amount of power over the group. Now individually, the shaman or the priest might be celibate. The shaman or the priest might not be individually reproductively successful, but the shaman or priest acts like the brain of the social organism in dictating the future destiny of that organism. It's very important and gains a lot of power. And so in society is no longer who's the strongest, the most brutal warrior. Society and the rules of society are constructed by these priests and these shamans who create rituals, and they create the bounds and the rules and the laws that dictate who is good and who is not good, who is beautiful and who is ugly. And there's an overlap between what we might call the artist class, or the artisan class, the craftsman class, and this priest class. Now from there we go into the merchants. Once you have a sufficiently advanced built-up society, now you have a mercantile society. And I could rerun the whole thing I've just said, except now we're talking about merchants instead of priests. What I really want to draw attention to very quickly is the idea of objectivity. So in the world of the warrior, whoever is better at fighting is the objectively superior person. That is the objective sense of reality that the warrior has. And I'm just going to write a quick message that's unrelated to this video, and then we'll be right back into the video. I'm sorry that I can't pause. It's almost like a live stream. And then we'll get right back to objectivity. So objectivity for the warrior means whoever can fight the best, whoever is best at war. And so from a warrior's perspective, men are objectively superior to women. From a warrior perspective, the taller man is objectively superior to the shorter man, etc., etc., etc. The man with higher testosterone is objectively superior to the man with lower testosterone. The man with the bigger jaw is objectively superior to the man with the smaller jaw. The man who is well proportioned and is muscular is objectively superior to the man who is misshapen and dwarfish and skinny. So these are objectivities within the rule set of the warrior ethos, which makes sense if you're coming out, if you're evolving humanity out of the animal kingdom. Clearly, all of these martial physical traits are very important. You're looking at chimpanzees; they have similar hierarchies. But then you're moving out of that into a priestly hierarchy, and all of a sudden, the objective virtue in society is no longer warrior virtue, as maybe like Nietzsche was hearkening back to, but now we're talking about priestly virtue. The ability to manipulate, the ability to deceive, is the negative connotation that one might put on the priest. But there's also the ability to create mythos and to create a sense of wonder and to connect with the divine. So there's clearly a positive side, depending on your perspective. And the ability of the priest to harness the collective energies of society, to unite, to harmonize, to bring together, as well as to delineate and to keep out that which is evil and that which is ultimately harmful, to create peace, to create order, stability. These are all traits of the priest. And so all of a sudden the priest and the virtue of the priest as defined by the priest class becomes the objective rule set by which individuals are judged. And so we have various religions of the world, and each religion has its own objective commandments, Judaism probably being the most stark in this. These are the objective commandments you have to follow to be a good Jew. If you fail, then you're bad, you're unclean, you're like goyim, you're like cattle. So that's an objective rule set. And as the evolution of society goes toward a more mercantile direction, we lose a lot of this objectivity. And so when we look toward religion, it's like, well, what's objective in religion? The Jew says one thing, the Christian says another, the Muslim says another. We don't have a sense of objectivity because the priest no longer rules over society as he did. Now we have a merchant class. And the only objective factor that we can latch onto, we can no longer latch onto how strong you are, because that doesn't mean anything in the social hierarchy. You can be a bodybuilder and a loser at the same time. It's no longer your priestly ability, because you can be a starving artist, failed poet. You can be, the church, you walk into a Christian church on Sunday and it's empty and it's full of old people and it's dying and decaying and degenerate and rotting. So the priest class is no longer an objective source of power. The only objective power that we have left in the world is money and materialism and capitalism. That's the only objective thing that we can place our hopes in, and that we have a common understanding, a common authority. We no longer have an authority in the strong man. The strong man has passed away. He is useless. We have technology has replaced the strong man. The technology has overpowered the strong man. He no longer matters. The priest has been outmoded. He's been done away with. He's been deconstructed by the postmodernists. Atheism is done away with him. Science is done away with him. Technology is done away with him. He's useless. He's boring. He's old. He's patriarchal. He's not with the times. He's not cool. He doesn't have social capital. So the priest has lost his cool, and the only people who are left that are cool are these merchants, these rich people, these celebrities. These people are connected in with Hollywood. These are the gods. These are the aristocrats. These are the famous people that we love and we worship, and we measure them quantitatively. How much money do they have? How many followers do they have on social media sites? Twitter, other websites like this, Facebook. I don't know if anyone actually uses Facebook anymore. So we have all these websites which quantify as a form of capital. Actually, views are a form of capital. Because some people might say, oh, well, let's say Perez Hilton might not be a rich man, but he has a lot of social media influence. And so he's powerful within our society. But what I would say is, well, he doesn't have greenbacks. He doesn't have United States Federal Reserve dollars in the bank necessarily. He does have social capital. So when I say money, I'm not just speaking about money issued as fiat currency by governments. I'm just referring to capital generally. Maybe I should just use the term capital instead of money. That would be more clear. So social capital, and social capital is a quantifiable thing. And it's no longer, the social capital is not stored up by being a good warrior. It's not stored up by being a good priest. Social capital is drummed up by creating drama. You create drama, you give people hedonism. You're not solving the problem of war as the warrior did. You're not solving the problem of spirituality as the priest did. You're just completely ignoring those two problems. Now we declared them irrelevant. And now it's about hedonism and pleasure and entertainment and distraction. Whoever can do that the best becomes a person with social capital. So we have social capital, we have fiat currencies, we have those sort of things. So that is the objective. We can say, okay, well, this person has more views than that person. This person has more money than that person. This is the objective thing we can put our hope in and say, no, this is what actually makes a person good. This is what makes a person happy. This is what allows a person to have as much interesting, have as much weird. I'm just getting all kinds of. I don't know what the end of that sentence is. It doesn't really matter. It's just a short video on the Trinitarian class structure of objectivity in society. So when we say, the left is politically correct, they're following the rules of politics. The Christian is trying to be morally correct. He's trying to be religiously correct. But morality and religion are rule sets of the priest. And that has been trampled down, and that's been quashed. And now we don't have warrior correctness, correct form in the gym or whatever that would be. We don't have warrior correctness. We don't have, and the beauties of standard. I meant standard of beauty. We don't have those being reinforced. We don't have moral correctness or Christian correctness or religious correctness. We have political correctness. So you see a hierarchy here where warfare is sometimes people say aristocracy and politics are connected together, but really warfare is the domain of the warrior. And correctness in war, the ability to win in a war, that's decisive. For the priest, it's correctness in morality, correctness in religion, correctness in spirituality, correctness in metaphysics. And then finally, those things pass away and we get to correctness in politics. And politics, from my perspective, as we use the term today, sort of ignoring the ancient Greek example, maybe the Greeks were in this period as well. Politics is the domain of the money men and the merchant class. And so when we talk about political correctness, we're really talking about money correctness. What are the right values and virtues to have, context dependent, of course. What are the right ones to have in order to make the most money? And that's tolerance, liberalism, those kind of virtues. So the left is following a rule set. They're very authoritarian, but they don't realize that. They think they're revolutionaries. The right wing is rebelling against the modern world and imagining this romantic past nature where the warrior's dominant, and they're really rebels when they think they're following the rules. So that is why I say left is right and right is left. Not because everything's confused or mixed up in a general sense of people don't have coherent ideologies, which is also true. But I mean it in a more fundamental sense, that the people who are most fervent believers that I believe in survival of the fittest, and I'm an authoritarian, I'm a right-winger, they're the ones rebelling against survival of the fittest within capitalism. They're the ones, rebelling against the concept of authority, liberalism being the authority. On the other hand, the people who most fervently say, the Antifas who most fervently say, I'm against fascism, I'm against Donald Trump, I'm against authority, I'm against survival of the fittest, I'm for egalitarianism and everything, they're buying into the hierarchies that exist. So people have been deluded, self-deluded, as well as this delusion is reinforced by media propaganda. But it is a delusion that is completely polar opposite. It is an exact mirroring down to the T of what people perceive themselves to be psychologically and where they actually fit in to our modern context. That's it. Thank you. See you next time.